All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the Fast Planning Technical Committee meeting. It is February 1st and 12:01 p.m. I'm going to start off with introductions of committee members. So I see we have present with us today, Judy Chapman, Kate Duber, Kevin McKinley, Bob Christash, Bill Rogers, Sarah Shocker, Kellen Spillman, and Danny Wallace. I also see that Alan Hosa has joined us. Alan, are you sitting in for Justin Burgess today?
Yes, I am.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for the confirmation, Alan. All right, so committee members that I see absent at this time. Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like Nick Zarnecki has joined us. So committee members I see absent at this time include Michelle Denton, Lieutenant Mike Roberts, RJ Stump, and Jacob Toyer. If any of those folks are on the telephone or on Zoom, I didn't see it. Can you please announce your presence? Okay, not hearing from those folks, but if they do join the meeting, I'll let everybody know that they're here. For Fast Planning staff, we have myself, Jackson Fox, Corey DiRitigliano, Olivia Lunsford, and Deborah Todd. We also have with us today as guests, Randy Bailey, Peter Stern, and Megan Flory. Is there anybody joining us today that I haven't announced? Okay, that's who we have with us. That takes us to approval of the February 1st, 2023 meeting agenda. Do I have a motion on the agenda? All right, thanks, Judy. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, any changes to today's agenda? It's a full one.
John Weber is.
Oh, John Weinberger is joining us for the record. Okay, I'm not hearing any changes, any objections to approval of the agenda as presented. Hearing none, we'll consider it approved. That takes us to approval of the January 4th, 2023 meeting minutes, which are found on pages 2 through 7 in the packet. I will note that we did make one typo. Maybe if you go to the next page at the top. Oh, it's been fixed in the packet. But if you have a printed packet here, it previously said December 7th, 2022 at the top, but we fixed that error. But do we have a motion on approval of the minutes? All right, thank you, Judy. Is there a second?
William Rogers, so moved.
Thank you, Bill. All right, any edits to the minute? All right, I'm not seeing any or hearing any. So anyone opposed to approval of the January 4th, 2023 meeting minutes as presented? Hearing no one opposed, we'll consider those approved. And that takes us to committee and working group reports, which begins on page 8 in the packet. Okay, so to catch everyone up from the policy board meeting that we had last month on January 18th, we did advance the 2023 through 2027 Transportation Improvement Program document to them for approval, as well as the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan document for their approval. At that meeting, they did make motions to approve both of those documents. However, the final vote on that motion was postponed until their next meeting, which we may do in February or in March. But the reason that the postponement of these approvals was made was because the Federal Highway Administration asked us to delay adopting those documents until the air quality conformity analysis determination has been made on the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So we're just in a little bit of a holding pattern on that. But as you should all be aware, the draft air quality conformity analysis has been released for public comment. It is posted on our website. The comment period was open from January 22nd through February 21st. So we have about 3 weeks left of that. And we have scheduled an interagency consultation with the EPA, the Federal Transit Administration, and Federal Highway Administration on the findings of that document for February 8th. at 11 a.m. That will also be an open public meeting, should any folks wish to attend and participate. Other items on here I'd like to make note of is that with regard to the Transportation Improvement Program, the technical committee did ask the policy board to discuss the fate of Barnett Street and whether to include it in that funding plan or not. After some discussion with the board, they did pass an amendment to add Barnett Street back into our funding plan, but add it as an illustrative project at this time. So it will show up in the next iteration of this document, but again, will be illustrative, no funding dedicated to it at this time. But that allows the technical committee and policy board to continue discussing potential funding opportunities for Barnett Street. Also want to make note that on here, there were two Federal Register notices, one of which has been published, one of which will be published here soon, related to air quality in our area. And they directed staff to develop comment letters for both of those Federal Register notices. The first comment letter for number 1 on the screen near the top there is on today's agenda as new business item 8A. All right, let's go to the next page. We also had a Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee meeting on January 26th, so just last Thursday evening. And a couple items here that relate to the technical committee. First one of which is that Corey in our office here has prepared a draft scope of services for the borough's transit plan updates. And we did take that scope of services to the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and they recommended that both the technical committee and policy board approve that scope as presented. They also wrote a letter to the technical committee and policy board for consideration of providing funding for the FAST Improvement Program in federal fiscal year 2027. Currently, we have about $1 million in funding in 25 and 26, but there's no funding for that program at this time in 27. And that's largely because of the increasing estimates on the mini street upgrade project. So, but they would like the technical committee to discuss ways to provide funding for that program in 27 regardless. And a copy of their letter is on page 10, the next page of the packet. And we will be discussing this letter further underneath agenda item 8E. And then lastly, beginning on page 11, happy to announce that we have signed the cooperative agreement with the state of Alaska to form a pilot regional planning organization for the Fairbanks North Star Borough. A copy of that signed agreement is included in the packet from pages 11 to 15. And the signing event for this occurred last Friday here in our office. So over the course of this year, there will be some agenda items that we bring to the technical committee to move this regional planning organizational model forward. And that concludes my staff and committee and working group reports. Is there any questions on any of that information? All right, I'm not seeing any. So let's go to our public comment period. Is there any member of the public that wishes to provide testimony at today's meeting? If so, go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom. Or if you can't find that feature, you can unmute yourself and begin your testimony, starting with your name for the record. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody on Zoom. Anyone in person? Okay, no one in person. All right. It looks like we have no public comment today, so we'll go ahead and close the public comment period and move on to old business item 7A. The call for project nominations for CMAQ and carbon reduction program funds. I wanted to provide you all an update. We're going to go to page 16. Just a reminder for everybody, project nominations to our office are due February 17th. Again, you can submit up until February 17th at midnight. So there is no timeline, it's just that date. But I do want to make note that we did have an applicant workshop on January 17th in our office. And I wanted to share with you today some of the ideas that were generated out of that workshop. Included in the packet is just a few informational materials that you have seen in the past. But Olivia, if you'll go ahead and move forward to page 21. During the applicant workshop, we had a mural board open. And so you can see some of the post-it notes that we threw in there for this kind of open discussion on potential project ideas. And we split them out by category, and these categories directly relate to the eligibilities for the congestion mitigation and air quality funds and the carbon reduction program funds. So just a few things to highlight here. For example, for congestion reduction and traffic flow improvements, there has been interest in 2 new roundabouts in our area. One of which could potentially be at West Valley High School near their main entrance. And then, well, actually there was one at the intersection of Wilbur Street and 2nd Avenue near the Carlson Center. And another idea for a roundabout at the Sheep Creek Extensions intersection with West Tanana Loop Road. Also on the transit side, there was an idea brought up to subsidize the transit tickets for all UAF students and faculty, and potentially expand that to school-aged kids groups. So that anyone, I guess, 18 and under could ride the transit bus for free. So we can use some of this funding to subsidize those tickets. And this is something that we have done in the past, back in 2013, using these same dollars. Also, Corey in our office here is looking at some what's called SaaS technology. So it's basically purchasing and using an app on people's phones so that they can make their mobile fare payments over their phone. There's also apps for bus tracking services and other things of that nature. It's a pretty wide range of apps that you can link for transit users. For bicycle and pedestrian programs, we've been working on developing a concept for wayfinding signs out at the Fairbanks International Airport that would complement the new bike ped facility that was installed out there last summer. Also, with regard to wayfinding signs, there is a package of wayfinding signs for the city's parking garage that we could potentially use this funding for. And there's already concepts and a plan developed for that. Let's see. Oh, and then on freight intermodal, we're looking at putting together an application in coordination with our road rail crossing reduction plan to install an automated train switch near the University Avenue crossing, which this would replace a manual train strip switch where the trains have to stop and someone on board has to get out and manually do that switch so that the train can proceed. And this is predominantly for rail cars traveling into and out of Fairbanks from Anchorage. Let's see, on the next page, there's just 2 pages of this here, but on the next page, some other ideas that came up. The continued need for more motor vehicle plugins, specifically North Pole's looking at plugins in their City Hall parking lot. And then for alternative fuels and vehicles, kind of towards the bottom there, there's been some interest in alternative fuel vehicles, specifically electric vehicles and hybrids. But I believe the borough might be interested in a pilot program to purchase a handful of hybrid vehicles and install a charging station at their main administration building. We also know that the Morris Thompson Center has interest in an electric vehicle charging station in their parking lot. We at FAST Planning, in coordination with our Unified Planning Program, have interest in grabbing some of this funding to develop a local electric vehicle charging infrastructure deployment plan to look at what a potential network of charging stations would be for the Fairbanks and North Pole area. And also, I believe the university has some interest in converting their shuttle buses to compressed natural gas or some other type of alternative fuel. So I didn't go over all the different ideas that came up, but this gives you an idea of what folks are thinking about. And I do know that DOT and the borough and the two cities are actively working on application. And as always, fast finding staff are available to assist with applications if you feel that there's a need there. There are a number of these applications where we are offering to help fill out the majority of the project nomination form for those local government sponsors. So feel free to reach out for any assistance that you need on those nominations. I'll stop there and see if is there any questions. This is just a informational update. Okay, not seeing any questions. All right, well, let's move on then to our next item on the agenda, the draft 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or MTP, Air Quality Conformity Analysis. This begins on page 23 in your packet. As I stated during my staff report earlier, we have received the draft analysis and we have advertised it for public comment beginning January 2nd and ending February 21st of this month. The policy board did authorize us to release that document without their advance review because the document came in after our last policy board meeting. But it is open for public comment. It is posted to our website. And again, we are having an interagency consultation meeting on February 8th to discuss the findings of this plan and collect agency feedback, specifically from the EPA, Federal Highways, and Federal Transit Administration. I did include a copy of the draft report in the packet from pages 24 through 64. And I'm going to highlight a few things that you can find here in this document. But if anybody would like to get a copy of the appendices, let me know, shoot me an email, give me a call, and I can email those appendices to you. Those are not available on the website at this time, but the draft report is available. But just a few highlights here of this report. Olivia, if you go to page 33. When we look at the motor vehicle emissions for our area over the next 20 years, and our consultant has modeled estimates of what those emissions will be. Just to let everybody know that in this exercise here, we are comparing the modeled emissions against what's called the motor vehicle emission budgets. So the budgets here on page 33 for particular pollutants, PM2.5 and nitrous oxides. These emission budgets are from the moderate state implementation plan for air quality because they are the only approved or only budgets that have been approved by EPA to date. So these go back to 2016. The state has proposed some new, more stringent budgets in the serious state implementation plan for our area, but those budgets are not yet approved. So according to the EPA, all we need to do at this time with this analysis is meet the moderate state implementation plan budgets, again, which are shown there on page 33. Olivia, if you go forward to page 38. I also want to make note at the specific request of the EPA included in this analysis, we did include the proposed Kinross ore hauling truck activity, which you can see throughout this document how that was factored in. But basically the assumption is 192 round trips per day, double trailer trucks, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And this model assumes the current route proposed through our urban area, going through North Pole into Fairbanks, along the Richardson and Mitchell Expressway, then north along Pegger Road, and then back east along the Johansson to the Steese Highway, and then up north to Fort Knox. So that truck activity was again analyzed and considered in this analysis. And the outcome of this analysis is found on page 57. So these are the outputs of the projected emissions specific to those two pollutants of concern. So again, our budget here is related to the moderate state implementation plan at 0.33 tons per day of PM2.5 and 2.13 tons per day of nitrous oxides. As you can see with the test results here in this table for different attainment years, 22, 24, 28, 2035, and 2045. In each of those attainment years, we are well below the moderate state implementation plan budgets. And I don't have I'll show you a figure later here in the packet, but if you compare these numbers against what the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation proposed for the serious state implementation plan, we still meet those more stringent budgets with these numbers. Libby, if you'll scroll to the bottom of this page, I also want to note that our consultant was able to parse out the impact of the Kinross ore hauling. As you can see in the second paragraph at the bottom there, the impact of the ore hauling through our area is about a 2% increase for PM 2.5 on vehicle emissions and an 8% increase on nitrous oxides for that truck activity. So you can decide whether this is significant or not. But again, the bottom line is that even with that additional truck activity modeled on our roadways, we're still well below the EPA's approved budgets for vehicle emissions going into the future over the next 20 years. Again, this document is available on our website. Should any of our local governments or outside organizations or the general public like to review this and provide comments to us, comments are due to our office by February 21st. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Jackson, this is Bill Rogers.
Yes, Bill, go ahead.
Do you have faith that this will placate the EPA?
I do.
Thank you.
Everybody wanted to, I should say everybody. There's a lot of interested parties in town that wanted to see what these trucks would have on air quality in our area. Now we have some model test results done by an independent third party that shows that there will be an increase, but it's a very small increase for our area, and it doesn't appear to be putting us in jeopardy to meet our motor vehicle emission budgets. But I think the EPA will accept these results. But we will be talking about it on February 8th at our meeting with them. Yes, go ahead, Sarah.
Do you expect, what kind of public comment do you expect? And I'm asking on the vein of, are there some in the community who don't believe that these analysis methods are the proper way to evaluate this?
Yes, and I've heard from different groups that will be providing public comment. I do know that Citizens for Clean Air is looking at this document very closely, and they have transmitted it to a group of attorneys down in California to look at the validity of this report. I also know there's at least one engineering firm in Anchorage that is taking a look at this. I don't necessarily know why, but this air quality conformity analysis is under much larger scrutiny than it has been in the past.
We haven't linked the public notice on our town report website as well.
Good.
So who is responsible for responding to public comment? Is that FAST, and you work with your consultant to do that then?
Correct. Yeah, Fast Plan is responsible for responses to public comment, but of course we'll be heavily relying on our consultant that performed this work.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
I had a couple of questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Kellen.
This is a dense document. It's kind of hard to read.
Yep.
If I'm reading it correctly, though, all the pollutants that were modeled, we were significantly below the thresholds for mobile source emissions. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Mhm.
In a follow-up, you said there's more scrutiny on this document now. If I remember correctly, this seems very consistent with past conformity analysis we've conducted and been accepted. Do you expect any different outcome with this one?
I certainly hope not, but I don't know. There's again, it's getting some more scrutiny. I've read the report. I have every bit of confidence in the world with Tom Carlson and Trinity Consultants that has been preparing these for us for many years. And I think that the modeling that was done this time was very consistent with previous modeling efforts that had passed the test with the EPA. So, and we did have, before Tom Carlson started his modeling, we did have 2 different interagency consultation meetings with the EPA, Federal Highways and Federal Transit Administration, so that they understood before he began his modeling effort, which version of the model he was going to use, what were the data inputs. And so, so even before he began his work, this has had a federal review, and now there'll be a federal review on the test results. But to give everybody a little bit of perspective on these numbers compared to the previous and current proposed budgets. So if you go to page 72, this is on a different agenda item, but I can show you the graph results of this. So on top of page 72, there's a graph. You can see at the very top in blue, the moderate state implementation plan budget at 0.33 tons per day of PM 2.5. That's the budget that is the only EPA approved budget at this time that we have to meet. Back in 2015, when we were working on the 2040 MTP document, those were the test results there that showed they were just underneath that emission budget. And then you can see in green the proposed serious state implementation plan budgets for our area. And with our last test result in 2019, with the 2045 MTP, we were just underneath that. And then the new test result that came out here in January 2023 shows you that we're even further below that. And a lot of the reasons for the jump in projected motor vehicle emissions is it's a couple reasons. One is that in our community, there's actually less vehicles on the roads compared to with DMV data, less vehicles on the roads than there have been for the past 6 years. Also, over time, with the Federal Motor Vehicle Carrier Act, which has produced more stringent emission standards on manufacturing new vehicles, the vehicles that we have in the makeup on the roadway are newer and generally cleaner. So you would expect kind of a downward trend in vehicle emissions over time. But this gives you a little bit of perspective that we're well below the moderate SIP budget, and we're even well below the serious SIP budget, according to the modeling results in that report. Okay. Any other questions? Graph analysis.
Last question. So we'd expect this back before us next month.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Kevin McKinley, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, Jackson, you talked about over time with innovation and modernization of our vehicles, that the test results are getting better and better. Is that expected throughout like the next 5 to 10 years also?
Yes, they model different attainment years. So again, 2024, 2028, 2035, and 2045. We kind of see it flat, but it may even be reduced in the future. What we don't know is whether the federal government will continue to, I guess, ratchet down on the manufacturing of vehicles and the emission standards that come out of there. Also, in our community, we have about a dozen electric vehicles right now, and I would imagine 5 years from now, we might have a few hundred, and maybe 10 years from now, we might have a few thousand. So over time, the fleet makeup is going to of vehicles in our community is going to change, and it only helps improve these numbers. But we're just going off of current DMV data as we see it at this time.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Alan, I see that you unmuted. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that there's also more stringent diesel engine criteria coming out here within the next year or two. So that's gonna affect any newer equipment, which a lot of this newer additional equipment we're talking about are new vehicles, not older, in the commercial side.
Yeah, very good. Appreciate that additional information, Alan. Okay, not seeing any other comments or questions. Let's move on to our next air quality topic. Let's go to item 8A, which begins on page 65. Our comment letter to the EPA on the partial disapproval of the state's implementation plan for the PM 2.5 serious non-attainment area. So as I mentioned earlier in my staff report, there has been a notice placed in the Federal Register, which includes both a partial plan approval and a partial disapproval of what was submitted by the Alaska Department of Conservation for the PM 2.5 serious non-attainment area. This is a 60-day public comment period. Comments must be received by March 13th. So about a month and a half from now. But I did begin working on a comment letter early in this process because if we waited until the March policy board meeting to approve a comment letter, then we would miss that deadline. So we spent a good portion of last week reading through this Federal Register notice and coming up with comments from fast planning. And we definitely had some direction from our policy board on what comments that we should focus on making, as well as what tone that we should carry this letter forward with. But again, just to note that some parts of the plan were approved, others were disapproved. Nick Zarnecki on the technical committee here has been running the circuit, giving presentations on what's been approved and what's not been approved and what work needs to be done through to various audiences throughout Fairbanks, and that will continue, I'm sure, over the next month or two in advance of this comment deadline. But Olivia, if you go to the next page, really what we're up against here is that if the EPA ends up disapproving of the plan following the close of this public comment period, which may not be till close to the end of this year, the EPA will begin implementing the sanctions that they have available to them through the Clean Air Act. The first sanction would be imposed 18 months following the disapproval, and that sanction would be 2-1 offsets for new sources of emissions in our area. Generally, what that means is that, I can give you an example. Say there's a need to put in a new power plant in town or replace one. That new power plant would have to you would basically have to, in order to install that new power plant with new emissions in our area, you'd have to remove twice as many emissions from some other source in our community to allow that new source to come in. And it could be simply replacing a coal-fired power plant with a diesel or some other alternative energy source for that power plant. But that can really hamper the ability of any major new installation in our community. So that's at 18 months following disapproval. But then if the deficiency in the state's implementation plan still remains uncorrected in 24 months, then the EPA can approve withholding federal highway funding from the Fairbanks and North Pole area within that PM 2.5 area boundary. Also, in the second paragraph in the middle, you'll see the effects that it would have on fast planning. If this plan gets disapproved, then we will fall into a conformity freeze such that we could not make any amendments to our transportation improvement program or our metropolitan transportation plan, and that would really hamper our ability to move funds around on projects where needed or start any new projects. Basically, the funding plan that we would have in place at the time of the conformity freeze is what we would have to move forward with, which is a little bit of a scary thought because as we've seen over time, we do a lot of, we do play a big shell game, moving funding around based on sometimes the project schedule slips or sometimes we get a new estimate and the project needs a lot more money and it won't allow us to do that. So we could get ourselves into a situation where some of the funding program for a particular project couldn't move forward in a particular year. And that would basically just go back to DOT to spend elsewhere in the state. But just a few comments here on things that were disapproved in that plan submittal. On the next page, there's actually quite a few emission source categories The list is at the top left there, but residential and commercial fuel oil fire devices, requirements for wood cellars, coal-fired heating systems, coffee roasters, char broilers, used oil burners, weatherization and energy efficient measures, and then important to us, mobile source emissions. They also disapproved the control strategies for our 4 area power plants. And on the middle there, you'll see that they also disapproved of the motor vehicle emission budgets that the state proposed in that plan. On the next page, this is the Federal Register notice is, I believe it's 42 pages long. So I just pulled out 4 printed pages for discussion, which leads into our comment letter. But you can see the section on emissions from mobile sources here on page 68 in the packet, which basically outlines that they disapproved of many of the transportation control measures that were included in that document, and specifically the state's rejection of certain transportation control measures based on the analysis that some of those transportation control measures would have limited or no PM 2.5 level reductions. Okay, so let's get into the comment letter. It is 7 pages long, and I'll try to kind of go through this relatively quickly. But this begins on page 69. What I've done with this comment letter is that I've kind of pulled out some higher level general comments on the Federal Register notice. But each one of these bullets on this page does have a detailed section which further discusses why we have made those comments and provide some additional clarity to the EPA on our position on this Federal Register notice. So starting off with each one of these bullets here at the very top there, and just noting that this comment letter only covers the transportation section of the Federal Register notice. So we don't talk about coffee roasters or wood smoke or other things like that. We're not getting into those other sectors. We're just sticking with transportation on this. So the first bullet there, we have access to a technical support document which provides more background on why the EPA rejected or disapproved of some of the state's rejections of transportation control measures. And looking through those individually, we found a lot of inconsistent determinations by the EPA. In some cases, the EPA approved a transportation control measure rejection because it doesn't have any benefit to PM 2.5 in your area. But then they rejected others where the state said that based on our analysis, there's limited or no PM 2.5 reductions. So it was, in a couple of cases, it was found to be, their determinations were found to be contradictory. And again, not consistent across all the measures. They didn't use the same methodology for each one. And they also appear that there's some citations in the Federal Register notice where they narrowly rely on a section of a 2016 final rule for state implementation plan requirements that, based on my review and as well as Nick Zarnecki's review of that particular citation, that section of the final rule doesn't apply to individual control measures. It only applies to the entire source category, which would be like all of the transportation control measures together. So it looks like they're relying on a section of the final rule that does not apply, and they disregarded other sections of that rule which would apply. They also, when you read through the technical support document in the Federal Register notice, it makes the appearance that they're asking us to try implementing transportation control measures that that the state's analysis have showed have limited or no emission reduction to PM 2.5 levels, and without any regard to the cost of those measures to the community. So we'd be spending millions of dollars on control measures that have no PM 2.5 benefit to our area. Also, again, as I previously noted, they disapproved the motor vehicle emission budgets, and they really just disapproved those because they didn't approve of the transportation control measure section. So you're kind of in a never-ending spiral with these two things linked together. But as in this letter, it includes that graph that I showed earlier, comparing our test results to the budgets. And even if the state were to go back and adjust those budgets by including transportation control measures that have limits of no PM 2.5 benefit, it really wouldn't move those numbers down appreciably. And we're about 4 times lower than what those budgets are. So it doesn't, it seems like a fruitless process to go back and revisit those budgets, even though that they even stated that the budgets were clearly or precisely quantified and clearly identified, and they had the appropriate consultations when they came up with those numbers. The next bullet, the EPA does not provide any credit to the state for our CMAQ program, which is actually required by federal regulations that the state set aside 25% of their CMAQ funds for any PM 2.5 non-attainment area they have in the state. So we are investing $2 million per year in CMAQ funds for transportation projects to improve air quality, but the EPA does not provide any credit to the state for that investment. And then we get into the Clean Air Act here, which is this is a big point that the policy board wanted me to make, is that the Clean Air Act of 1970 in large part was developed because of increased urbanization over time throughout the US. And with these urban centers, there was the vehicle traffic, of course, increased over time as well. And vehicle pollution was very visible with smog in our air. But that problem over time, the EPA touts on many different web pages that's not, vehicle pollution is not a big problem anymore across the United States because of the emission standards that manufacturers have to meet nowadays. The vehicles are 99%. The vehicles, buses, vans, trucks, they're 99% cleaner for most tailpipe pollutants than they were in the 60s and 70s when the Clean Air Act was passed. And then the last bullet there on this page that, showing with the state's analysis of the emission contributions to PM 2.5 in our area, mobile source emissions based on their 2020 analysis were only 6.8% of the PM 2.5 in our area, where there's, other higher emission source categories. So on the next page, a few more bullets here. The crux of this problem is that the sanctions that the EPA has available to them really focus on vehicles and our highway funding. So as this progresses forward, the direct impact, there will be a direct impact on the Alaska DOT as well as fast planning and funding our transportation projects in our area. But DOT and fast planning have no control or influence over other emission sources such as wood smoke that are actually causing the problem. So it feels like it's the wrong punishment for the crime, so to speak. And then ultimately at the end of the comment letter, we are asking that the EPA issue what's called a protective finding. And they can issue, the EPA doesn't appear motivated at this time to issue a protective finding for our community, but they could issue a protective finding to eliminate the possibility of a conformity freeze and sanctions on our federal highway funding if they simply approve the emission budgets that the state submitted. And we can show that with our test results that we will meet those budgets. But at this time, again, the EPA does not appear to be motivated to issue that. But that is the ultimate request here to try to avoid these federal highway sanctions and any conformity freeze on our funding plans. So again, those are kind of the general high-level comments, and I get far more detailed into each one of these bullet points in the next few pages, which hopefully folks have taken a read through this. I don't think I'm going to go through the rest of this page by page in consideration of the time that we need for this meeting. But yeah, Olivia, they're on page 73, the previous page there. Again, I just want to point out that, I've provided the list of all the CMAQ funded projects that we have implemented in our area over the past past 10 years. Again, it's about a $2 million investment per year in transportation projects that improve air quality. And the EPA does not, in this analysis, provide credit for these, nor do I think the state even submitted such a comprehensive list. So this is kind of a more of an FYI for the EPA. And then on the next page, I talk about additional CMAQ dollars. DOT also gives us an additional $800,000 per year in CMAQ funds, which we generally put into non-motorized projects. But then I also want to point out to the EPA the DOT's Northern Region Signal Interconnect Project, which I don't have the exact number of intersections that were connected. I'm still waiting for some answers from Pam Golden and Carl Heim. But from my research, it looks like there's been over $20 million invested into connecting all of those signals. And by connecting all those signals and DOT having remote access at their from their facility on Pegger Road, that's really improved their response time and capabilities to do signal time modifications and monitor different signals, immediately initiate troubleshooting. And of course, with that signal interconnect, there's a measure, you can measure the improvements to travel time and reduce traffic delay, congestion, and idleness signals with that project alone. And then lastly, right below that table, Alaska has the roundabout first policy. In the non-attainment area, there's 13 roundabouts that have been constructed over the years. And as I mentioned earlier, there's more planned for our area. But that is a proven air quality improvement measure according to the Federal Highway Administration's CMAQ toolkit. And more information on the next page. The bottom one there talks more about the protective finding that I just mentioned earlier. But so we're making comments in the Federal Register notice, basically disagreeing with many of their disapprovals in the transportation section. But we're also asking them to consider issuing a protective finding so that we can avoid a conformity freeze and potential federal highway sanctions, which I think the data that we have at this time for our MTP test results, which are hot off the press from last month in January, show that we will easily meet the budgets if the EPA will approve those budgets. So I think I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. This is an action item today to move forward this letter to the policy board. I am open to any revisions or amendments that you would like to make to this letter, but for right now, before we open up public comment on it, I'd like to know if there's any questions that have come to your mind on the content of this letter. Yeah, Kellen, go ahead.
Could you just maybe elaborate a little bit more on the statement that we don't get any credit for CMAQ funds? I didn't really understand that.
I'm actually have Nick. Can you answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kellen, the emission credits in the SIP, they have to be something that is a committed SIP control measure. And the state does not want to put CMAQ projects in as a committed control measure, because then the state is legally on the hook to get those completed. And if the project changes, or if the funding gets moved out of it, then the state's still legally on the hook to complete it. And because there's not really that many emission credits to claim, it's not worth the risk of failure to implement a SIP and to allow more flexibility within that funding pot.
Thank you, Nick. Any other questions or follow-up, Kellen?
Not related to that, just there's a lot of complex elements of this that I don't fully understand everything. I did have one more question, and maybe you could just correct my understanding. So if we get to the 24-month period and federal highway funds are withheld, that's essentially all federal highway funds, including National Highway System funds, basically everything with the exception of HSIP funds. Is that correct?
HSIP and CMAQ
Okay,
And my understanding is like our transportation alternatives program, so non-motorized projects can still move forward, but not the 80% bulk of the investment that we see every year in our community.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Judy.
also, I think maybe preservation projects or
Yep.
just, projects that aren't expanding the facility, but are just keeping it in good repair and go forward.
but the bulk of the funds, essentially the CTP funds and the National Highway System funds would be withheld. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kevin, go ahead. You're on mute, Kevin.
My
There you
apologies.
go.
I just wanted to follow up on Kellen's comment and question. When they withhold the funds, is that, they're just gone then? Or is there any way to get them back, or do they rebudget them sometime, or do we even know?
So my understanding is the funds are not gone. The state of Alaska, so state DOT still has control of those funds. And they can divert those funds to other areas of the state. So funds withheld from our area can be used anywhere in the state outside of our bubble. So they could divert them to Anchorage or Juneau or other communities of need. So I don't think the state DOT would lose any funding over this. But yeah, that funding would have to be diverted to other areas of the state. It would just be our community that loses that funding.
Can I follow up on that? So would it be
Yes.
another MPO? Or just another area period?
Those are decisions yet to be determined, but I think funding that's allocated to fast planning could be given to the Matsu MPO. Maybe that would be a logical place to divert the funding to. But yeah, I hope we don't get there. But yeah, those types of decisions will be made at a later date.
Thank you, Jackson.
Kellen, go ahead.
Maybe a more practical question. I'm not sure if it's more appropriate to go through you or maybe Mr. Zarnecki. Essentially, the root of the problem, as we've proven through these countless studies, isn't mobile source
Correct.
emissions, but it's the stationary sources, the wood smoke that we're working through. Best case scenario with this letter, with this new decision by the EPA, what's our hopeful outcome? That they change their mind, they approve everything, and keep working through this?
Well, I think there could be two positive outcomes. I mean, the state obviously is going to have the opportunity to revise and resubmit the state implementation plan, and potentially that could get approved, all the elements approved before the 18-month and 24-month clocks hit, right? So that's one possible positive outcome. In the absence of that, again, we're hoping that the EPA will issue a protective finding on this. And that's kind of our last comment in this letter here, that a potential solution for us in the transportation sector is to ask the EPA to consider issuing that protective finding, which at this time they're not necessarily willing to do. But we hope to change the direction of that sentiment.
And follow up with that protective finding would be specific to essentially mobile source and
Yes.
transportation related.
Yep. Okay. It wouldn't exempt any other sources.
Okay.
It would be just us.
And Jackson, could I add to that?
Yes, please do, Nick.
In addition to that, there's the paths forward for this do get a little bit complicated. There's this comment period, and eventually what we are really after is an approvable SIP, because that's having a SIP disapproved is the triggering action that results in the conformity freeze and the sanctions. The elements that Jackson did a great job going over that are not approvable right now, in order to satisfy the deficiencies that EPA has put in this proposed disapproval, the state of Alaska has to submit another SIP amendment. That SIP amendment requires regulation changes and it has to go through a public comment period. And so we can't rectify all the deficiencies within this comment period. That means that we've got kind of two different actions. We've got what we're doing during the comment period, and then we've got a longer term action that's going to be an additional SIP amendment. Now, the way that this plays out with the sanctions and the conformity freeze is once EPA finalizes an action on this, which will most likely be a partial disapproval because we can't actually rectify all of the deficiencies within this comment period, then that's when the conformity freeze begins. And that's when the sanction clocks and the FIP clock starts. And if we can get a SIP amendment submitted to the state of Alaska or to the EPA at the same time as the proposed disapproval comes out, then EPA has a statutory requirement to act on that SIP amendment within 18 months. That is also the same timeline of the first sanction. And so we are most likely going to see sanctions and a conformity freeze, or the sanction clock and a conformity freeze, but we still do have a path forward to get an approvable SIP before the sanctions are implemented. The only way to pause the sanction clock once they start is to have EPA fully approve our SIP. And that's every single element that Jackson laid out in that SIP. There are some areas where we have larger gaps between where the state of Alaska is at and where EPA is at. And there's ones that are smaller, easier items to fix. And I can go into those, but they definitely don't necessarily relate to the stuff that FAST is working on right now. But if there's any interest, I can explain those two things.
Go ahead, Bill.
One last follow-up, I promise. So Nick, if I understood you correctly, it sounds like you and your office are fully expecting a disapproval with a conformity freeze. Is that correct?
Yes, there's still, there is a potential option if we can get enough comments in, and if we can show the EPA that there is sufficient compelling new information and that the agency should not base its decision on what's in front of them right now within the SIP, then there is a chance that we could get the agency to pause on this action. That's of course what we're going after. But the chances of that are, smaller than having EPA issue a partial disapproval and having conformity freeze start. And that's because there's also litigation right now that's pushing the timeline.
And then, Jackson, with this conformity freeze, that essentially, if I understand correctly, freezes the tip, freezes moving of funding, starting new projects in the tip,
So
etc.
we can still do administrative modifications. We can't do amendments. So we can do some minor changes. But I mean, within our thresholds and moving a little bit of money around here and there. We can't do any new project starts. Any of the illustrative projects, we can't put any money on them. And we can't, move large amounts of money between years. So anything that would trigger an amendment, we can still do administrative modifications, but those don't get us very far. In a given year, we typically have 2 or 3, these types of big amendments. So because it's hard to stay on track when when projects are in development.
And then if, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, if you said, if we do get a SIP that is approvable within that 18 months, would the conformity freeze cease? Would that go away?
Correct. As soon as we get an approvable SIP, the sanction clock is paused and the conformity freeze goes away. But it's only when EPA does their final action for approval. And so that's the difficult part is, it's going to take us at least a year to get this SIP amendment put together due to the complex modeling that we have to do on our end. And then we also have to take it through public comment period with the state of Alaska. And then we submit it. And then EPA has 18 months at that point to act on it. And it's only once they act on it, if they fully approve everything, that we can get these clocks to stop.
Thank you.
Okay, last thing I want to mention, Olivia, if you go to page 76, before we move on to public comment and entertain motions and amendments to the letter. So I just want to also note that there is a Federal Register notice that should be published here soon on this air quality topic. The EPA is also proposing at roughly the same time to reduce the health-based standard for PM 2.5 emissions in our area. And there's a couple different standards that they're looking at lowering those levels. But on the next page, it highlights a few of those. So they're proposing to lower the primary annual PM 2.5 standard from 12 micrograms per cubic meter down to 9 to 10. But then also for the primary 24-hour PM 2.5 standard, they're looking at lowering that level from 35 micrograms per cubic meter down to 25 micrograms per cubic meter. And they're proposing to do this based on some recent health studies that have been completed and considered by the EPA administrator. So this is something that's going to, not only compound, or it will compound this other Federal Register notice with the partial disapproval of the SIP. And I've been directed by the policy board to write a separate comment letter for this other one once this gets published. But as of today, I've not seen that it's published, but it's in the queue to be published here soon. So this is going to be a compounding thing on our community. But we don't necessarily need to discuss that at this time. We really should just focus on the first Federal Register notice and act on that here today. So Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, Jackson, the proposed PM 2.5 NACs have been published, and so that just kind of hot off the presses, and the comment period closes on March 28th.
Thank you, Nick. All right, so I will locate that and I'll bring you another letter directly related to this new Federal Register notice at our next meeting. All right, let's move on to our public comment period. Is there any members of the public that wish to provide testimony on Fast Planning's comment letter to the EPA on Federal Register notice? Yep, we have one in the room. Go ahead. So state your name for the record and then.
I'm Lori Satego on page 74.
Okay.
The roundabout first paragraph. So it should say roundabouts are included in the toolkit as a premier quality or an ad.
Here, I apologize. Let me find this again. Okay, so page 74. And where was this again?
The roundabout first policy paragraph. Say as a premier quality.
Oh, as a group. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Easy correction. Appreciate that. All right. Any other public comment today, online or in person? All right, I'm not seeing any, so we'll go ahead and close the public comment period. I'm now looking for a motion on the comment letter. Which begins on page, let's go to 69, in case folks want to make any amendments or revisions as well. Do we have a motion to advance this to the policy board?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
I think Jacob got it. All right, so discussion or any amendments?
I'll just say thank you for diving into this very complicated issue that has some serious repercussions I don't think most people are fully aware of. And I don't want to be nitpicky, but since the first page on 69 the third, fourth bullet down that starts with the Clean Air Act 1970. There's a couple missing transition words to, if you just reread that bullet.
Okay,
carefully.
I will. All right. Other comments, questions, discussion? Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson. Just general comments on this is that from the state's perspective, getting as many comments from the community into EPA during this public comment period is very advantageous, and it's the strategy that the state of Alaska is actively pushing towards. And so, you know, I think Jackson did a fantastic job articulating the concerns of fast planning in this comment. And, you know, I'm fully supportive of it. And I would just say that as, you know, leaders in the community, getting the word out for anybody to express their views to the EPA and to make comments on this would be important and would be helpful for the community to get their viewpoint on the administrative record. And there will be a couple of different options. The comment period is open through March 13th, and then EPA will actually be in Fairbanks to hold a public hearing on this in person. And so they will take verbal comments at that public hearing. And it is not set yet on a date, but that public hearing, it will probably be sometime in early March. And I can disseminate that information through Jackson to make sure that fast planning is aware when that comes out.
Thank you, Nick. Go ahead, Kels.
One question, maybe to you, Jackson. I know the Borough Assembly is aware of this and has it on an upcoming agenda. Are the two cities tracking this too? Do you know?
They were made aware of the Federal Register notice at our last meeting.
Okay.
So, yeah, the city mayors are aware of this and they're very upset, but I don't know if they have any proposed resolutions or comment letters that they're preparing. They've not indicated that back to me at this time. But tonight, the borough has their Air Pollution Control Commission meeting, and I intend to be present and provide public testimony at that meeting to let them know what our perspective is, and that our draft air quality conformity analysis is out for public comment.
Okay.
So they may be advancing something to the assembly.
Thanks.
Danny, go ahead.
Hi, Jackson. Hey, if there is a resolution that FAST would like to see, at least the North Pole City Council pass, if you can send sort of a draft or some text to that, we can support that. So we could do that if we get the body of the text.
Sounds good, Danny. I'll work with you offline on that. All right, any other comments, questions, discussion, amendments?
Jackson.
Let's,
Sorry,
let's go to Bob. We'll do
Yeah,
Sarah,
sorry.
and then Alan. Go ahead, Bob.
if you could send that draft resolution to me too for city council consideration, I appreciate it.
Happy to do so. Okay, Sarah.
You probably already thought of this, but have you engaged the Chamber Transportation Committee on this issue?
Yeah, Nick is giving them a presentation on February 9th.
Oh, great.
And I will share with them our draft comment letter. Okay, Alan, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just curiosity as to whether, I know in the past during, big projects, that sort of thing, there's advertisement thrown out there to really get the community involved. Is there anything of that sort planned, or would that even be allowed, being not third party? I mean, is there any way that could be considered to actually get the word out to people? Hey, you need to put your comments in there. I know that can go either way. It always can. But I think for the most part, people understand that this is a chance for us to keep moving forward. They might actually make comment.
think that question should be directed at the state. Nick, you want to sit in the hot seat and answer that one?
Yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with advertising and trying to get the word out to basically the entire community and doing it through whatever means folks have at their disposal. So if you wanted to do, Facebook ads or TV spot or radio spot, that's all fine. The state of Alaska is not currently doing any of that because our advertising budget comes from federal grants from the EPA. So we kind of get crosswise if we use our grant funding that way. We are doing a lot of community outreach and kind of a grassroots effort, trying to get in front of the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce, FEDC, the Borough Assembly, Fast Planning and all of these places. And what we're doing is we're trying to ask those community leaders in a grassroots type of effort to spread the word out and get it out by whatever means possible.
All right, thank you, Nick.
Okay, one other comment.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so if there's anything that you have, Nick, that may be packaged where it's something you could kind of, I mean, I know you guys put a lot of work into this, and kind of kudos to everybody involved there on Jackson and the group and all that in the state, everyone for packaging this well. Is there anything kind of short and sweet that could be perhaps sent out to kind of if there's anything of that nature, I wouldn't mind a copy of that. Maybe I can help in some way.
I guess I have some PowerPoint presentations that I can definitely share because they'll be, public material for these different venues that we're going in front of. And then the state's actual comments, we're still working on developing those. And so it'll be a little bit of time before we can release any of those publicly. But I'm seeing in the comments, a one-page information sheet would be helpful. And so that's something that we can look at trying to get developed.
Be great. Thank you.
Thank you again, Nick. Okay, we have a few other agenda items today, so I'm going to just go ahead and call the question on the letter to advance it to the policy board for their approval at their next meeting. And I'm going to start out with Alan.
I move to approve it, or excuse me. Yes.
Just say yes.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, Judy.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
Kate.
Yes.
Bob.
Yes.
Bill.
Yes.
Sarah.
Yes.
Kellen.
Yes.
Jacob.
Yes.
Danny.
Yes.
And John Weinberger.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everybody. That motion passes. Okay, our next item is item 8B, the long and short range transit planning
Jackson?
coordination. Oh, yes, go ahead. Oh, Kevin, I missed you, Kevin. What's your vote?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Kevin. I apologize for that. Okay. Item 8B, the long and short range transit plan and coordinated human services transportation plan. This is also an action item here today. As I mentioned in my staff report here, this begins on page 81. As I mentioned during my staff report, Corey DiRtigliano has put together a scope of services for updates to both the short and long range transit plan for Max Transit, as well as the coordinated human services transportation plan. During development of the scope of work, this was shared with the borough's community planning department, and we got comments back from Don Galligan. We also shared this with Max Transit and had a meeting with Michelle Denton, their director, and Dave Johnson, and went over the content of this scope of work and made some revisions from that as well. So at this time, we understand that the borough's community planning department and Max Transit like the scope of work as presented in the packet here today. And this was also reviewed by our Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which passed a motion last week to recommend that the technical committee and policy board approve this scope so we can move it forward to an RFP. And so the action today is to advance this to the policy board, but I did want to give Corey a few minutes here to kind of provide you all an overview of what this scope of work entails for these two plan updates for the borough.
Great. Thanks, Jackson. So like Jackson mentioned, there are really two parts to this. We're bundling them together because there's a lot of complementary overlap. There's a lot of demographic and sort of community-based data gathering that has to happen. And then when we were also thinking through the process, there's a lot of community meetings and outreach, and because these are all transit-related topics, we thought there would be probably some synergy and some cost savings in having them occur consecutively. So the two scoops, I'll give kind of a 10,000-foot overview, and then if you guys have any questions you'd like me to answer. The two portions are, like Jackson mentioned, update to the short and long-range transit plan. That's with a focus on Max Transit and VanTran, the two primary providers of public transportation in the borough. Max runs the fixed route bus routes in the community, and then VanTran is an on-demand system for people with mobility challenges, seniors, etc. The previous plan was over 10 years ago now, and provided essentially a list of possible transformations that the system could undergo. There was some progress made on that, but given the amount of growth that the community has seen in the last 12 years, combined with some other factors, it's due for an overhaul and an update. The information that comes out of the part or scope A would be used for allocating resources for future capital improvements, as well as a redesign and overhaul of the system. The scope of work you guys can read down to the various tasks, but it's information gathering. There's a fair amount of community outreach and charrettes that take place. There's a lot of look at existing conditions and also doing some future projections as to where growth will occur within the community to try to create a system that will capture some of that development. And then ultimately recommend a series of changes to the system to better situate itself within the community today and for the next 10 years. So that's the scope A portion of the project. Scope B is the coordinated human services transportation plan. And that is largely an inventory of all the public and private transportation providers within the borough. And its primary goal is to get everyone coordinated and on the same page, and then also identify ways and opportunities that these organizations can work together more efficiently and have less redundancy, so they can allocate their resources in a way that basically gives them the greatest spread of community. So for just reference, I'll name off some of the communities involved in these, just so you guys have a sense of who ends up getting engaged in that process. So that includes groups like Access Alaska, Boys and Girls Club, Denali Center, Max, VanTran, FNA, Head Start, FRA, First Student, UAF, Pioneer Home, etc. So it's anyone that's operating a fleet of vehicles for the express purpose of transporting the public. The outcome of that is, again, it's generally a list of recommendations and potential optimizations that groups can undertake in order to be better coordinated. And then that becomes basically the backstop for any grant applications that end up going forward. The previous plan from 2015 was approved by the council. So it was a resource that could be used for grant applications as a fully adopted community. So that's really the goal. We're looking at hopefully putting this RFP out in April and then having a 1-year turnaround time for these two plans. The scope A, we anticipate taking kind of the lion's share of the effort just because the amount of outreach, whereas scope B is more of a series of meetings with a slightly lighter deliverable. So that's more or less the summary of it. Does anyone have any questions or clarifications they'd like?
Right, Judy.
Are you putting this out to consultant then, or are you doing that in-house?
Yeah, out to consultants. So our role now at FAST is that we get some transportation funding. So there are tasks that we're doing outside of like an RFP process, like the SaaS one that we talked about, which before. SaaS is an acronym for service as, or software as a service. So any kind of app-based stuff that we can do with a faster turnaround time. Those are the kinds of services that we want to go. Yes, this will go out to the public.
We do have 500,000 in old transit planning funds used for this. So we have $500,000 for this consultant effort, which may take up all of it or hopefully a little less.
Yeah.
Kellen, go ahead.
Question. In the 2013 process, one of the kind of the bigger questions and one of the more controversial aspects was talking about the fares and the fare box recovery rates. Is that an issue that we're gonna get into in this update as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially with the recent history of COVID, a lot of municipalities went to fareless systems for a number of different reasons. One, just to kind of reduce the economic burden on the public while people are trying to keep the economy afloat, but then also because it simplified the roles of drivers in the transit system. So it's a huge topic right now in terms of how to proceed. Fare recovery is really not the primary goal of a transportation system. I mean, I know that in a capitalist society, we think that everything should be in the black, but from my understanding and a lot of the research I've been doing lately is that fare recovery is completely secondary to the fact that you're keeping the workflows, community moving and a workforce afloat. So while that will be discussed, I know that there is a lot of controversy that's still going to come up in regards to that. There are some other projects we've talked about recently that would help subsidize or maybe make free certain populations or potentially certain routes in the system. There's areas or communities like Seattle that operate free buses within the core, but then different routes have different costs associated with them. So fare is absolutely a big problem with this look.
Then a follow-up. The last plan didn't go to the borough assembly. Is it proposed that this plan also wouldn't go, but the policy board would be the?
I'm gonna point Jackson to this one.
We don't know yet. We have asked, so ourselves and Michelle Dunn have asked that question of Mayor Ward. We are researching with the clerk's office to see if there was any actions, whether even it was a resolution support, maybe it wasn't an adoption. We're trying to see if there was any assembly interaction back in 2013. From everything I've heard, I don't believe that there is, but Mayor Ward will have to decide whether or not these updated plans would go to the assembly for approval, or if it's sufficient for the MPO to simply adopt these plans for the transit system. So with all three, local mayors present, since it affects multiple local governments in their jurisdictions. So that's to be determined, and we purposefully left that out of the scope work until Mayor Ward provides his decision to us. Okay. Sarah, go ahead.
Great job with this, Corey. I was just going to suggest, and you may or may not choose to change the text, but maybe it was just advice going forward as to kick off the contract. For task 6C, winter maintenance, I think there's been a lot of look at this in the last 2 years, most recently with my motorized plan. And I just want to suggest that we focus this review as it impacts transit, maybe look at previous studies that were done and see if there's been anything updated. I just don't, hopefully we aren't reinventing the wheel is another suggestion. And things like prioritization of routes is unique. Transit's uniquely affected by that, right? Because it doesn't necessarily, the priority of the route may not time with how a bus pullout is cleared, for example. So they have some unique considerations, and I was just going to suggest focus on that versus the general winter maintenance topic, because 500,000 is a lot, but you'll eat up a lot of consultant fees. So
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I think what the thoughts here are, one, to look at how the new position is handling winter maintenance. They've hired a new staff member to go and do clearing within the pad of the exact stops. But again, they're not addressing the pathways leading up to it. So I think there's some of it has to do with the pedestrian side of it, but certainly if there are documents that we could point the consultants towards, that would, save a lot of time in terms of their research and time spent gathering information, we can add that to task 3 as something to familiarize with. But I'll look at the language and make sure that we're not asking them to do an analysis of how roads are cleared, and a broader scope. I think we're concerned about what the experience is like, kind of like 6D there is the accessibility of it for ADA. Something I learned early on was that the reason we don't have too many bus shelters within the boroughs because those are paid for by federal funds, and in order to use federal funds, it has to have an ADA compliant sidewalk leading to it or ADA facility leading to it. So the winter maintenance, I think we'll be looking more at the pedestrians as they approach the state stops and then moving on. But yeah, good advice.
All right, other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So before we ask for a motion on this, is there any public comment on this item here today? All right, I'm not seeing any public comment. So I'll now entertain a motion from a technical committee member.
Move to approve these 2 scopes to the policy committee for consideration.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Sarah. Okay, any further discussion?
I
Go
have
ahead,
one
Kellen.
comment, and it's a suggestion. I don't necessarily know that it needs to be a motion, but it would be my suggestion in this. We did run into this a little bit in the 2013 project, and actually a number of times since then. Population densities. I think that's a big thing to consider. There's national standards with different transit services and the population densities where they make sense versus where they don't. And since that 2013 plan, it did take it a little bit into account, but didn't call out those national recommendations. We've had a lot of requests over the years. Everyone would love if they had a transit line go from their house to their place of employment. But it just doesn't happen. And requests such as, Chino Hot Springs Road and the Goldstream Valley, and even what we ran into when we were running the Salcha line for a long time, the densities are just really, really difficult. So my suggestion would be to specifically call out looking at the densities in this and areas where it is feasible and versus areas that it's not feasible based on population and employment densities.
Right. And maybe a follow-up kind of comment to that is another kind of recent innovation that has to do with SaaS technologies is on-demand on microtransit is becoming much more popular as a trend, and that's essentially think like Ubers or Lyfts, where you can use an app to basically identify your point of origin and your point of destination, and then there's a back end process that basically routes all these things together. But there's a trend now where bus operators are also doing the same thing. So they'll run, like imagine like the 15-person passenger vans around, and they'll basically have a much larger tributary area that they provide transit services to, but that you don't dedicate fixed route lines to such sparsely populated areas of the community. So that's something that we have included here, is that we want to make sure that they're looking at lots of different transit opportunities and not just pushing around fixed route high capacity buses. So yeah, it's a challenge to, in the multi-circle Venn diagram of speed, regularity, coverage, it's hard to get all of them at the same time. Okay.
Right, any other comments, questions, or discussion? All right, I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to go ahead and call the roll on this item. And we'll begin again with Alan.
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Kellen,
Yes.
Jacob,
Yes.
Danny,
Yes.
John Weinberger.
Yes.
And for the record, Judy Chapman just stepped out, but
Can I vote for her? She indicated how she was voting.
I don't think we need it. This motion is going to pass. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. That scope of work will be advanced to the policy board for their meeting on February 15th. Okay, let's move on to item 8C, the Airport Way West Bike and Pet Facility project increase. This is an action item here today. On the agenda, we have consideration of approving a construction phase increase of $139,292. And the reason for the increase is construction overruns from last fall. They also have a need for a little bit additional construction engineering, and our indirect cost allocation plan rate increased over the past year from 4.64% up to 7.18%. Olivia has left us, but
Can we navigate something?
I do, but I've got a little bit of a surprise for today. So on this one, if we go back in the meeting packet folder. All right, go to the bottom there and look up email from Shelley Dykeman. Share that on the screen. Yep. Okay, so I visited with project control here today to see if we had any offsets coming into us that they were aware of. I assume that they did not, and they did confirm that they don't have any offsets for fast planning on the horizon right now that they're aware of. But they did take a deeper dive into the Airport Way bicycle and pedestrian facility and found that there was some unexpended funds in the design phase of this project. So at this time, this project doesn't need the full 139,000 because there's 95,000 available for de-obligation from the design phase. So the need for offsets to cover this increase today is only $44,007. And we do have sufficient offsets to cover that amount. So today I'm simply looking for an approval by the technical committee to use offset funds to cover this funding increase. And before we take a motion, I'll ask if there's any questions. Okay, not seeing any questions. Is there any public comment on this item today? See any public comment? All right, so now I'll entertain a motion. Again, we do have sufficient offsets to cover this amount, $44,007. Our offset balance is right around $70,000 right now, so we'll take up the bulk of that, which will lead to some challenges for the next two funding phase increases. But again, I am comfortable covering this with offset funding. So I'll entertain a motion now on approval of this project increase. All right, thank you, Sarah. Is there a second? Jacob? All right, thank you, Jacob. Okay. Any comments, questions, or discussion on this item? All right, I'm not seeing any. So I'll go ahead and call the question then. Again, the motion is to approve the construction phase increase for Airport Way West Bike and Pet Facility in the amount of $44,007. We'll start out with Alan.
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
thank you. Sarah,
Yes.
Kellen,
Yes.
Jacob,
Yes.
Danny,
Yes.
John.
Yes.
All right, thank you, everybody. And just for the record, Judy is still away. But that motion passes. All right, let's move on to our next increase request here. This is item 8D for the College Road bus pullouts project increase, which is found on page 91 in the packet. This one's gonna get, these next two increases here are gonna get a little bit more difficult to make a decision on where the funding will come from for these.
Oh, I have a surprise on E though, so it's not as difficult.
Okay, well,
We're cool.
I'll let you, yeah. So for this item here for College Road bus pullouts, as you can see on the screen here, there's a need for an additional $100,000 to close out this project. Similar to the last one, there were some overruns on traffic control and unclassified excavation. And there were some overrun items on for asphalt and pullouts and driveways. Based on the construction manager's calculations, he thinks that he needs about $100,000 to cover all of these overruns. And so with the approval of the offset funding for the previous project, again, our offset balance is low and we don't have sufficient offsets to cover this amount. So Olivia, if you'll pull up the separate page here, this is not in the packet. This is something that I typed up this morning, and zoom out a little bit. There we go. So for this item and the next one, my understanding is that we have a need for College Road bus pullouts, $100,000. And then the fast improvement program, we're short $181,500. Though Sarah may tell us that that number has changed. But I put together some options here for the technical committee to consider because I don't necessarily have a recommendation for you all. Basically, to cover these amounts, I've got three options on the screen that I think are viable. First one of which is to cover both of these through a reduction in scope to this summer's construction program on the fast improvement program, which is an Aztec subdivision, 2nd Avenue Dog Park, College Road crosswalk. So we could say remove, one or two of the roads in Aztec subdivision, or kick down the line the dog park or College Road crosswalk. Some of these components can be removed and then done later in 2025 when we have our next construction season for this. Another option would be we can cover both of these by delaying the Pega Road Airport Way intersection study, the start of that for 1 year. So basically, instead of starting it this spring or summer, we would start it in the fall, early winter. By moving that project out 1 year, of course, there will be a trickle effect that will, if you take $300,000 out of 23 and you move it to 24, then something in 24 has to get moved to 25, and something in 25 has got to move to 26. So there's kind of a cascading effect. And so I listed off some potential projects where could potentially for that amount be impacted by simply delaying the design start on a project 1 year in a future year, or potentially a reduction to the fast improvement program in 2025 by that amount. The last option, option C, is to simply approve these amounts using advanced construction funds. So you'll be using 2024 funds, and then I would bring a proposal back to you for how we would fill that gap for future years. So none of these options are very pleasant, but unless I hear otherwise, I believe this is the situation we're in. And we're not talking about a lot of money, but again, I don't have a crystal ball that shows me that there's going to be a lot more offsets coming into us this year. So Sarah, did you have an update on the fast improvement program as it relates to these two items?
Yes, I would say consider that the amount of funding needed is $100,000. And I'll discuss that in item E. And if I can just add my 2 cents on that, and given that we have some bids open still, it seems like option C is our most prudent option right now until we have more information for where the rest of our fiscal picture is for the year.
Can you repeat that last statement?
The issue is $100,000, not 281.5. We'll get to that when we talk to E. And my personal opinion, for what it's worth, is option C is the most prudent, because if we lock ourselves into decisions on A or B, we still have some question marks in our future on the tip for the remainder of the year.
Okay, I appreciate that very much. All right, thank you. All right, so this action item again is just related to College Road bus pullouts. We'll handle the next project underneath the next agenda item, but So $100,000 for College Road bus pullouts. As Sarah had indicated that she thinks that option C might be the most appropriate action to get that phase, project phase increase funded. But I'm going to open it up if there's any questions on these options or the increase itself.
Hey, this is Danny Wallace from North Pole.
Go ahead, Danny.
Do we have fidelity on again, why, College Road is over by $100,000? And maybe I should have asked that on the Airport Way project too. But again, do we have more fidelity on why that is that way and why they need $100,000 extra? Again, it's an important project, but just more fidelity would be good.
I think Sarah will have to take that one.
Sure. And Danny, these are unfortunate because these are large amounts of money for a small allocation we get, but the reality is in horizontal construction, we contract by the unit price, and unlike buildings, for example, we can't exactly qualify how many teaspoons of dirt it takes to build bus pullouts. And so when we bid these construction contracts, we're giving an estimate of quantities. For something like traffic control, we did as a contingent sum to try to put an estimate of the budget we think it takes to do the traffic control. We incentivize the contractor by allowing them to overrun because they're certainly not going to compromise public safety so that they can save a buck. So I guess, I don't know if that's the fidelity we're looking for, but we have, this is why we pay the contract administration costs. We pay staff in the field to measure these quantities, manage the traffic control. And the reason we're seeing this, well, at least these first two we're discussing is we're buttoning up these projects, and this is where the costs settled out.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Sarah, did I understand you correctly? So you said the fast planning improvement program is going to be reduced. Is that going to be reduced to 100,000, or is that going to go away?
It's gonna go away. So
Okay.
the issue, the total at the top for consideration of this matter should be just 100,000.
All right, any other questions? Not seeing any public comment on this item today. Okay, no public comment. I'll now entertain a motion. Go ahead, Kellen.
Make a motion to approve the requested $100,000 for College Road bus pullouts utilizing offsets or advanced construction to pay for the funding increase.
Okay. And is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, sir. All right, discussion on that motion. Hey, go ahead, Kellen.
It was a little vague about the funding source. It looks like there's still, FAST has a little bit of money in the offsets. If you go to the last page of the meeting packet.
About 25,000 after the Airport Way approval.
And then advanced construction could be I think Sarah's right. I think that's a good option. I really don't like option A because all those roads and all those projects were already designed. So we'd essentially be losing all that design work or pushing it off to a more expensive project. Option B is an okay option, but again, it has ripple effects. So I think option C is a good one, particularly if it's just somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 we need to find elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. Other discussion? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I'll just go ahead and call roll then. And start out with Alan.
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Kellen,
Yes.
Jacob,
Yes.
Danny,
Yes.
and John.
Yes.
All right, thank you, everybody. That motion passes. Okay, let's move on to item 8E, underneath new business, our last item of new business today, the FAST Improvement Program. There are two issues here for discussion today. First one of which on page 92. Again, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee has authored a letter to ask the Technical Committee and Policy Board to consider providing funding for the FAST Improvement Program in federal fiscal year 2027. In our Transportation Improvement Program document, we did not include any funding for this program in that year because the estimate for construction of the Main Street upgrade project has escalated to close to $12 million. And it uses up a large portion of that year's funding, as well as a decent portion of funding for the next year, 2028. So they were hoping, the Bike and Ped Advisory Committee was hoping that the Technical Committee and Policy Board would discuss this today, potentially pass a motion to direct me to take another look at this. So that's one issue for Technical Committee members to potentially take a motion on today. The second issue is outlined on page 93 in the packet here, where John Natardis last month had indicated that we have a funding shortfall on the FAST Improvement Program for this coming summer. At that time, it indicated the shortfall was $181,500. And he presented some options to me for removal of one or more of the gravel to pavement roads in Aztec subdivision, which would cover that shortfall. And those options are included on pages 94, 95, and 96. I did reach out to Borough Rural Services on this project to see what their opinion was for removal of one of these roadways. Their opinion was Tamarack. However, I think through a little bit more due diligence, if we have to remove a road, I would like to talk to the road service area commissioners for Aztec to include them in that final decision. But then we have new information from Ms. Shocker today that the estimate has changed again, such that we may need to take action on this or not here today. But Sarah, did you want to
Sure.
add a little bit more as to the latest estimate for this project?
So our estimate has not changed, but similar, we wrapped our brains over this on how to make this work. Because it's on this size of a project, it's not that much money. And all of the options don't really get, it's just unfortunate, as Kellen had said earlier, to go so far in a project and not fund it. And for those of you who aren't familiar, we don't have the option of like crossing our fingers and just hoping our estimate is high and seeing how the bids come in. We have to, you know, if this was like $20,000, that would be one thing, but for this amount of money, and for the big climate we're in, we didn't think that was responsible. We do have the funding in the design phase of this project to cover this increase. It will limit our options going forward as we develop the FY25 improvement program. But because we would normally carry that funding over and start working on 25 as soon as we deliver this project. So that's something to consider given DPAC's desire to continue funding this project annually. But as of today, we can obligate the estimate that we have and advertise for bids if we approve just shuffling design funding from this phase into the construction phase. I will say though, that does not mean we won't be back here again talking about it after bid opening.
Yep. Understood. And then just so everybody is aware, we do have scheduled in our funding plan to provide $210,000 for the design phase in federal fiscal year 24. So by this October, they will get some design money back to begin designing the 2025 construction season program. So, but I appreciate you diving into that and seeing what options could work to cover the full package. Okay. There's two items here again, looking at current funding need for this summer's construction program. but then also looking at federal fiscal year 2027. So we'll be looking at separate motions for those items if folks are interested. But happy to continue to answer any questions if you have any one of those items. Kellen, go ahead.
I don't intend on making a motion for the 2027 program. Would it be appropriate if I made comments and talk to why I think it's fine the way it is?
After we, well, let's see. Oh, go ahead. We may not have discussion on it. No motions made at this time. So yeah, go ahead and share your thoughts.
I don't intend on making a motion to fund the improvement program in 2027. I think the improvement program is very important. I also think what's incredibly important for this organization are the big projects that we do. Every couple of years, we do a big project, Wendell Avenue Bridge, Illinois Street, and the big project that we're getting out in the next couple of years is Mini Street. I think that should be a #1 priority. Granted, there's going to be some smaller projects like the Fast Plan Improvement Program that kind of fall to the wayside. I think we can incorporate it in the years before and after that, but I think we should do everything we can in 2027 to get Mini Street through. So that would be my personal opinion on this, that maybe take a year off on 2027 and really just make sure we get Mini Street going that year. And it can be very easily added back in my opinion. We have 4 years between now and then.
All right, thank you, Kellen. Other questions? Before we open these items up for public comment? All right, not seeing any. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the public comment period. Are there any members of the public that wish to provide testimony on this item here today? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we'll go ahead and close the public comment period. I'm now looking for a motion. So these, again, there's 2 topics here, but yeah, one motion could be to reallocate funding from the design phase of the improvement program to cover the funds needed for the construction phase for 2023. That could be a motion. And then we can have, why don't we handle that one first, and then we'll handle the 2027 program issues second. So is there a motion on the 2023 construction program?
Do we need a motion to do that, or?
Not really, but I think it would be helpful for the record.
I'll make a motion to fund the increase for 2023 construction with existing design funds on hand.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Is there a second? Jacob, all right. All right, discussion on that motion. See none, so I'm going to go ahead and call roll. Alan,
Yes.
Judy,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Kellen,
Yes.
Jacob,
Yes.
Danny,
Yes.
and John.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. That motion passes. I'd now like to entertain a motion, and this would be a recommendation to the policy board on the issue of no funding for the Fast Improvement Program in 2027 and the current funding plan. What recommendation would this committee like to move forward to the policy board on this topic?
Would it be appropriate, I don't know if this needs a motion, would it be appropriate to advise the policy board to consider this in future tip amendments? To
Yes.
satisfactorily respond to feedback?
Yes.
I think that motion.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sarah. Is there a second to that motion? All right. Jacob again. All right. Any discussion on that motion?
I know that Kellen said he wasn't gonna make a motion, but I think this kind of satisfies thing. I agree with what Kellen said. I can say, And I've spoken passionately about this, the importance of this program. It does two things. It's delivered fast, preservation. The other thing it does for us is it's our most flexible program, and we just got done figuring out how we were gonna come up with $140,000. So this program can serve as something that can be scaled up or scaled down to meet funding shortfalls or availability. I can tell you though, today, I am not worried about 2027 in this program. We have a lot of time to figure out what it looks like in 2027.
Thank you, sir.
Jackson, this is Kevin.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I apologize. My computer kind of fuzzed out a little bit. Could I have the motion repeated?
I didn't write it down. Go ahead, Sarah.
My motion is to recommend to the policy board to respond to consider BPAC's request and future tip amendments.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, let's call a roll. Starting with Alan,
Yes.
Judy,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Kellen,
Yes.
Jacob, yes, Danny,
Yes.
and John.
Yes.
All right, thank you. That motion passes. Okay, on the informational items here, I'm going to breeze over these, but on page 104, this is a new map that Olivia's created here in her office, showing the differences between the 2010 and 2020 census boundaries for our urban area. You can stare at this map for about 30 minutes or so and still be learning new things. And there's going to be a big mapping effort, of course, as we go through this boundary development exercise here. But this really highlights with the changes from 2010 to 2020, with those census urban area boundary changes, what parts of our community have been added and which parts of our community have been removed. You can see additions over in the Chena Ridge Road area. Also some removals in that area as well, but you also see some big additions up in the Farmers Loop area. And then when we get down towards Eielson, with the additional development over the years in the Moose Creek area, it's brought that census tract for Eielson and Moose Creek in so close to our boundary now that I believe we can do a jump and connect that currently disconnected segment to bring that into our boundary. But again, these are all decisions that will be made at some point in the future, but this gives you a little bit of perspective on how things have changed. But our deadline to come up with a new boundary for what we foresee to be urbanized over the next 20 years is going to be December of this year. So this is going to be something that we'll be working on throughout the year. And this is the first map where you can kind of get a better understanding of where we've grown and where we will shrink in relation to the outcome of the census. And then the only other informational items is obligations and offsets, which begin on page 105. There's been no new obligations since last time we met. And our offset balance was about 70,000, and now it'll be reduced down to about 25,000. And again, we have some pending de-obligations for project closures, but none really on the horizon at this time with project control. So with that, are there any committee member comments today or questions on that informational items? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
I just wanted to put out there, if anyone, so this would be maybe for the borough and potentially the city, there were some projects, ideas that were thrown out for the carbon and CMAQ program. If you're looking for DOT's assistance with any estimates, please contact us immediately. We are working on the CTP and TAP calls, about 35 of those, plus the new STIP. So we are really frantic right now, but we will help anyone if they need it. Randy and I weren't aware of anyone actively pursuing those. If they're on your own, that's great. The second thing I was just going to point out for this group is not to be doom and gloom, but we've had several bid openings in the last 2 months. And it's not looking great for the construction bidding climate right now as compared to our historic cost estimating, we're seeing increases pretty consistently on the order of 30 to 40% beyond what our engineers' estimates are. Now, there's a number of these projects that are specialized for various reasons, such as they have bridge components or other unique considerations, but it's pretty clear to us what we started seeing in rural Alaska last year when the risk and price of fuel shot up. It's catching up to contractors now when they are bidding in the risk and cost volatility. So I just wanted to give everyone a heads up. That is what we're seeing. And I don't know that it's going to get any better anytime soon. We're trying, even catching our estimates up doesn't solve the problem because we're back here increasing our estimate or increasing to the low bid. So just an awareness issue for everyone.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other committee member comments? Okay, not seeing any. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Kellen. Is there a second? Second by Judy. Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned at 2:02 PM. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.